Marx said that communism would hit America in two stages. Stage one happened in 1930 when the Frankfurt School sent teachers to Columbia University. And then stage two happened when my friend here, Donald Trump, got taken down by socialist media. What happened to our elections? You know, as Stalin says, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. The number one aim of communism is the abolition of private property. Number two was taxation. A heavy and progressive income tax is necessary for the spread of communism. And what Biden did, he hired 87,000 new internal revenue agents. They're going after our money. The average American doesn't know that because they think, oh, I must pay my taxes. But if you look at history, America was founded as a tax-free nation. And then these Nazis, communists, fascists get in there and they start teaching, oh, you should pay your taxes. That's not what the Constitution says. Any idiot knows. You raise interest rates, the bonds collapse, and now derivatives are collapsing with Deutsche Bank. We're going down, like it or not, and that's moral hazard. The rioting in France today is America in 2 years.
Tell me about Ukraine, and what do you see when you see this war?
The worst thing about it is I think we're all into World War III, but as you know, the Ukraine is like the breadbasket of the world. So I think what they're going to do is create starvation, and then inflation, and then we have anarchy, we have revolution. And the great American empire comes down, and we have the weakest president in history. So your greatest asset's your mind, but they won't teach you that at school. They teach you to get a job, save money, buy a house, get out of debt, pay your taxes. That's brainwashing. And then 99% of the American public and 100% of school teachers cannot read financials. And that includes the accounting teachers. The Marine Corps trained us to crash. We had to crash 3 times a day, Brian. Practice crashing. So in Vietnam, when I went down 3 times, it was like, okay, I've done this before. No big deal. You know, I was fighting for my country. I was fighting for our freedoms. But the biggest freedom of all is in freedom of education, which we've lost. And the way we fight back is with knowledge, with real financial education.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Robert Kiyosaki, the entrepreneur, investor, financial expert, and author of the globally renowned bestseller, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the #1 personal finance book of all time. Robert, you've dedicated your life to challenging the way tens of millions of people around the world think about money and investing. For the last 12 months, you've warned us about the prospect of an economic crash that will be greater than anything we've ever known before, one that will leave many people living in poverty. Recently, we've watched Silicon Valley Bank collapse, then Signature Bank collapse, then Credit Suisse collapse, and we are now hearing of a pending Deutsche Bank collapse. Robert, you've warned us that the bond market is crashing, that inflation is now systemic, and that this contagion will spread into a global banking crisis that will have devastating consequences. Robert, welcome back to London Real.
Well, Brian, thank you. And before I go on, I want to give you a shout out because there's people that are always in your corner. And all these years, you've always been in my corner, and I appreciate that. And that's a very rare quality to have because there's so many times that when a person becomes successful, friends get jealous. And you've always been acknowledging of my success. You've watched me come up and all this. And, you know, it's called the Judas effect. You know, the guy's your friend, but when you get more successful, they stab you in the back. And I've had, Brian, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is now 25, 26 years old. And I've had so many friends just stab you in the back. It's just amazing what happens. I want everybody to know Brian Rose is a true friend. You find somebody like Brian in your corner, you're a very lucky person. So Brian, thank you for all these years of true support and friendship.
Rob, I really appreciate that. I'm quoting you all the time to my students. I'm teaching in my Wealth Academy, my crypto courses, and my investment club. I think I probably quote you every single session I go in because your stuff, it rings true, maybe even more so now than when you wrote that book 27, 28 years ago. So look, I appreciate it. I can never have you on enough times. I always get excited, and all the London Reelers, they love you. So appreciate you being here, and thanks for coming on really on short notice. I mean, you've been in high demand lately. I've seen you on Fox. I've seen you on the major financial programs because, everyone's looking to you to try to explain this because you've been calling this for 5, 10, 15 years. I just want to call out a couple things that have just shocked me, Robert. As you know, I worked in the highest levels of international finance for 15 years. I worked on Wall Street, I worked in Chicago, and I worked here in London for 10 years in the credit markets and intrastate markets. Robert, two of my top clients when I worked here in the city of London, that's what they call Wall Street here, were the massive global banks. Two of my top derivative clients were Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank, right? These were guys that paid me millions and millions of dollars in fees over the years. Guys became good friends of mine, and it's really hard to watch a bank like Credit Suisse, its equity value go to zero. Good friends of mine, my former clients, they were paid in equity, and I'm really, I don't want to text them because, I don't want them to come back and say, Brian, I've also lost all of my life savings. And now to hear Deutsche Bank, Deutsche Bank is considered the creme de la creme of European banks. When I was in the city, it was probably the top European bank when it came to derivatives, to new issuance, to everything. And to think that potentially that equity is going to zero, it's mind-boggling. And so I want to get your thoughts on all of this, including what you've seen stateside with Silicon Valley Bank. Man, 2 weeks ago, that was high drama, and Signature Bank and the rest. Robert, what's your take on this latest development of the crisis you've been calling for at least a decade?
Well, I'm going to promote myself here. This is Rich Dad's Prophecy. Came out in 2013. And I said, why the biggest stock market crash in history is still coming and how you can prepare and profit from it. So this was 2013, but I just watched what happened after 2008. And, there was a repo market crash. All these crashes were happening, but the average person without financial education, unlike you and myself, has no idea what's going on. And going a long way back in 1965, I read this book here called The Communist Manifesto. It's only like 50 pages, but it's one of the most influential books in history. I hope someday I can write a book as powerful as this one. But the Communist Manifesto is the manifesto of academics. And I hate to say that because that's the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So I went to military school in New York, and my economics teacher had me read this book here. And I go, why are we studying him when we study Keynes or, Malthus or those guys or Ricardo? He says, because this guy here, Marx and Engels, they're the most powerful economists in the world. So in 1965, I was 18 years old in New York City. I came from Hawaii all the way to New York to read this book here. And I go, holy Jesus. My family are communists. Now, it doesn't mean they're bad people, Brian. This is where I get my ass in trouble. You call somebody a communist, and I'm a Marine too. Marines, you don't take the word communist lightly because you shoot them. So I spent two tours in Vietnam as a Marine pilot. And so when I read this book here, I went, oh my God, communism is like Christianity or Buddhism or Mormonism, whatever you want to call it. It's communism or economics is an economic religion. If you can understand that. So when I read this book here, it's only like 50 pages. I'm like, oh my God, my family communists. That's like saying, oh my God, I just found out my family are Mormons. Do you know what I mean? And you know how goofy it is here in America is my friends are Mormons, but they're treated like they're communists. So that's human nature is what I'm getting at, Brian. You know what I mean? If somebody is unlike you, we tend to want to kill them. So I read this book here and I went, oh my God, what's happening? You know, we're teaching communism to our kids. So let me just read one, you know, what Marx says. The abolition, the number one aim of communism is the abolition of private property. Okay, that's number one. Number two was taxation. A heavy or progressive income tax is necessary for the spread of communism. So I watch what person does, not what they say. So this guy, Joe Biden right now, he just hired 87,000 new IRS Internal Revenue agents. That man, by his actions, maybe not in his, I don't think he's got a mind left anyway, but anyway, he and I are the same age. And I act like him sometimes. But anyway, he hired 87,000 new IRS Internal Revenue agents. They're going after our money via communism. But the average American doesn't know that because they think, oh, I must pay my taxes. But if you look at history, and you know, you and I are both Americans, America was founded as a tax-free nation.
Yeah.
It was called the Boston Tea Party, was that 1773? That was the foundation of America. And then these Nazis, communists, fascists get in there and they start teaching, oh, you should pay your taxes. I'm going, that's not what the Constitution says. Do you know what I mean? And so our problem, Brian, is in education. So that's why I wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I don't hate my family. I respect them. Like my sister is a Buddhist nun. You know, she could try to convert me to Buddhism, but as I'm a Marine, you know, we kill Buddhists, unfortunately. But, you know, we all come from different philosophies. And I think the word that's missing today is respect for other people's philosophies, but also as a respect for our education. What are our schools teaching kids today?
Yeah. Well,
Wokeism, gender identity is us, you know, but no, what the heck are we teaching?
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter? Well, what about all lives matter? Why don't we teach them that? Do you know what I mean?
I want to get into the school stuff, definitely. But, you know, you said something in one of those interviews recently, Robert, that really hit home for me. And it has to do with the themes you just mentioned. You said they're trying to centralize our banking system.
Yes.
And when I heard you say that, I got chills in my spine because look what they're doing. You know, they took all these local, basically SMEs, that's the way banks started off, these local businesses that serve their local communities, you know, in a way that would make a profit. Okay, that's what they did. And now they're centralizing them. What else is centralized? Well, China is centralized. When you start to centralize something, it feels like you take away that capitalist, you know, mindset, and then all the incentive structures go. Is that what you meant when you said that?
Absolutely. Because when I read this book here, I went, oh my God, what is a central bank? What is the Federal Reserve Bank of America but a central bank? What is the Bank of England? A central bank. What is the ECB, European Central Bank? They're Marxist organizations. They're Marxist organizations. At the core of it, they're Marxist. It used to be a bank was just a small little bunch of guys getting around, they lend money out. And, you know, in religion, I wasn't very religious, but I was raised a Christian. They have a picture of Jesus chasing out the bankers. You know, that should have been a lesson for everybody. If Jesus was kicking all these bankers, maybe we should too.
But like you said, these started off as like, you know, mom and pop institutions that would help the economy grow. Yes. That would help people own more property, right? My grandparents, you know, they went west when their families and ancestors got to America. One of them became a cattle rancher right not far from you in Arizona. One of them became a cotton farmer not far from you in Arizona. And they were able to do that because people lent them money to build their businesses. Now, when Silicon Valley Bank gets taken over, Signature Bank gets taken over, they centralize it, which means it goes back to those power structures that are ultimately pushing these, like you say, Marxist ideals, and it's taking us way, way back. And that's what worries you, right?
Oh, well, look, this here is a helicopter gunship. You know, I flew this in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
Went down 3 times.
Is that a Huey?
And,
Huey.
Yep.
Okay.
And
I fly a Robinson R-22s, right? So we're both pilots.
oh, good for you. Good for you. I went down 3 times in Vietnam. I said, that's enough, man.
Jeez.
You only have, how many lives? You have 9 lives. I got 6 left. So, but anyway, I was out there killing commies. And I went, oh my God, we should read this book here. So I came back from Vietnam, January 3rd, 1973, too. I landed in Norton Air Force Base in California. And I got hit with eggs and spit on by all these hippies, these love children. And 69 was Woodstock and all this stuff. The hippies were coming on. I went, holy mackerel. What this guy had said was coming true. Marx said that communism would hit America in 2 stages, or capitalism. Stage 1 happened in 1930 when the Frankfurt School sent teachers to Columbia University, Teachers College. And so that was 1930. That was stage 1. And then stage 2 happened, in my opinion, and is when my friend here, Donald Trump, got taken down by socialist media. What happened to our elections? What happened to our elections? That's communism. As Stalin says, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. And so, Brian, I sit here as an American, a veteran, killed a lot of people, good people, in the name of capitalism versus communism. And I come home to get spit on, hit with eggs. Remember those days? I remember I had, Marines had no hair and all these guys had these, they were in their tranny haircuts and all this stuff. I mean, I don't care who you sleep with. It's none of my business. Do you know what I mean? I don't care if you want to swim with the girls' team. I really don't care. But the girls might care. You know what I mean? Like, what the heck's happening here? But anyway, so I've been fighting it ever since, and we fight via education. So you and I fight via education. It's the most important thing we got. And I know you get attacked, I get attacked by the very people that are supposed to be promoting freedom of education, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. What's happened to our freedoms? That's what my concern is.
Now, Robert, for a lot of the people that are watching these banks fail, like you said, you and I have a financial education, but a lot of people don't. And they panic, they ask questions, they don't really understand how a bank like Silicon Valley Bank can fail. And again, there were some wide-ranging consequences that I want to get to as well. But how do you explain to people, how the banking system works, then how the Fed works, and what do you tell them to do about all this? Is it ultimately down to voting, to education? What do you tell them?
Well, that's why I wrote this book here in 1997. It came out. This book had to be self-published, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because every one of those academic elites running our publishing houses like Simon & Schuster and all that, they turned my book down because they're Marxists. They said, you don't know what you're talking about. I said, what do you mean your house is not an asset? What do you mean savers are losers? What do you mean this? Why do you say you should not pay your taxes? I mean, look at my friend here, Donald, when he ran against Hillary Clinton, she says, Donald, you don't pay taxes. And he laughed at her and he says, that means I'm smart. And again, you go back in history, America fought Mother England in 1773 because of the tax on, I think, tea, the Boston Tea Party. You look at our history. We fight for our freedoms. But today, once the academics, as this book says here in 1930, entered Columbia University, he didn't say this, but that's when the teachers took over the communists took over academics. And then this, my friend here, gets taken down in 2020 in a rigged election. Now I'm going to get censored for that. But in my opinion, just go back to what Stalin said, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. Yeah, and that's what's going on in our country.
It's interesting what you say about taxation, because I was in Dubai in October last year, and it was really my first time there. I'd been there like 15 years earlier, and I was kind of blown away by this spirit. You can kind of feel it when you're walking around the streets and amongst the people and in the incredible buildings. But it's this tax-free zone where capitalism is promoted, where they have a long-term vision of growth for the country. They're the city of the future. And I pulled out my phone and I was walking through one of those like tunnels, those high walkways, and I recorded a vlog, and I titled it this, Robert. I said, Dubai is what America used to be. That's what I did. It was a spontaneous idea I had in my head. And I was like, here's a place where the government's not trying to stand in your way. They're not trying to stop. They know that they need entrepreneurs to create, to build the future, and they're going to stay out of their way and give them every opportunity possible. And you could feel the excitement. I can only imagine that's what America felt like a couple hundred years ago. And then you go to our supposedly advanced Western democracies and you look at massive taxations. You look at these, like you said, things are going Marxist. You look at these ridiculous social issues. You look at these other things and you're like, well, who's the advanced civilization? It's not us over here in the West, I don't think.
No, and I was in London last night. I should have stayed over and talked to you there. But I was coming back from Romania, and Romania is, in my opinion, if I was going to move to a country, I'd move to Romania. The reason is that they're so capitalistic there, and they're once a Russian satellite.
Yeah,
they know what communism is like, and they fight it. And so, my aunt was a prima ballerina of Paris, and she was from Romania, but also that's where Count Dracula was from. So I'm more like Count Dracula, I think. But anyway, it's history is worth studying and all this, but America has gone so communist via our academics. That's the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that's why I wrote the book. And I get attacked by my family. He said, how dare you call our family communist? I said, just read this book here.
You mentioned Romania. When I was in 2020, when we were getting banned and deleted by all the tech platforms for our fight for freedom of speech, I was walking down the sidewalk one day and a guy drove by in his car, hit the brakes and pulled over. And I thought, uh-oh, they're going to grab me finally, Robert. And he jumped out of his car and he came up and he shook my hand. His kids came after him. He took pictures with me. He said, Brian, I grew up in communist-controlled Romania. And I came here to this country so we could have freedom of speech, because I remember what it was like when we didn't. Yep. And things got very bad in Romania, as we know. And This was a guy from that former idea system that was coming out saying there's something distinctly wrong with our now Western system. And it was really interesting to hear it coming from him, Robert.
Yep. And that's why, what you were asking me about the banking system. I'm a student at R. Buckminster Fuller. He wrote a book called The Grunch of Giants, Grunch, came out in 84, I believe. And Grunch stands for Gross Universal Cash Heist. So I'm reading Fuller. I was a student of Fuller. This guy's one of the greatest academic minds of our time. He's probably a Marxist himself, but I like his ideas. And Grunt stands for Gross Universal Cash Heist, how our wealth is stolen via our money. So that affected Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because I said, savers are losers. Your house is not an asset. Why don't they have financial education in our schools? Is that a mistake?
No, it's not. I've gone pretty deep on this recently. Between listening to you and our friend Dr. Bruce Lipton, it all links up and it all comes together. How about
Gad Saad, man? That boy is on it.
Oh yeah. So I had Dr. Gad Saad on the show last week, and yeah, he was really on it. And
oh man,
it's great because he kind of walks this interesting line where he's a professor at a university that's basically, I joke to him, your university is shadow banning you. And he's like, yeah, they are. But he walks a fine line. He's got a great personality, which maybe allows him to kind of poke fun and make his points. But he understands the problems with academia. My daughter just went to school in Boston. So I asked him advice, like, how do I make sure she doesn't get indoctrinated? And we had a long conversation about this. So yeah, you'll love that episode.
What did he say? What did he say? Because let me tell you something. When they infect your brain, you're screwed. The love of money is the root of all evil. I'm going, give me a break. Give me a break. Why don't they teach us about money instead? What about the ignorance of money? What's that costing us? What happens when you have a criminal like this guy Biden in charge of the U.S. government? You know what I mean? How can the guy open the southern border, let 4.9 million people stream across with fentanyl and drugs and sex and all this stuff? And then we wonder why our homelessness goes up. Well, maybe it's because our drug problem is going up, you idiots. And how come San Francisco, the most beautiful city on earth at one time, has now you got to watch where you step because there's human feces all over the place. And that's what happens when you're a liberal Marxist commie pinko. You know, it makes me sick. And people, oh, let's defund the police. I said, you want to defund the police? Knock yourself out. It's crazy. It's nuts what we're teaching.
It's nuts to watch what's happening over there. I mean, you mentioned this a couple times. I'm going to ask you, your good friend Trump is running for election. There's all this talk of them trying to arrest him and indict him. And then, of course, obviously, Ron DeSantis is running as well. What do you make of the whole situation? Well, with Trump and the arrest, what do you make of all that? And what are their chances against Biden?
Well, talk about a media savvy guy, huh? Trump. Is that boy media savvy? He tells the world they're going to arrest me. If they arrest him, he's president. You know what I mean?
Elon tweeted that the other day. And it was the first time I saw it in black and white, and I was like, that's a really good point. You know, and Trump was like, I'm not going in the back door. You got to cuff me and stuff me and walk me down the front. And
he'll do the perp walk.
Yeah, that's very media savvy because most people would think that's political suicide, but he knows better.
No, he knows. And America right now is on edge, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it looks like
most of us, there's about 30% of us who really hate what's going on. And the other people want to send their kids to school to become communists. It makes no sense to me. And look at student loan debt, Brian. The most onerous type of debt possible. Who brought that to us? Oh, Barack Obama. You know what I mean? And, you know, Barack is the only reason Biden is there is because he's holding position for Michelle Obama to become the first black female president. Oh, my God. Romania looks pretty good to me today.
Do you think Trump's going to win?
I'd vote for him. The trouble with Trump, he and I have the same problem. Open mouth, insert foot.
What do you think of Ron DeSantis? I saw an interview with him the other night on Piers Morgan, and, you know, I like him.
Yeah. I nobody listen because, you know, Don's two sons, Don Jr. and Eric Trump, we're good friends because we're politically incorrect hunters. We go to Africa all the time together. I've spent days on a tropical island with those two boys. No running water, no toilets, no food. You get to know two young men very well. They're definitely not Hunter Biden. You know what I mean? They're great young men. I mean, they're fabulous young men. So I said, why doesn't your father and DeSantis just join teams? So Trump's got 4 more years. DeSantis has 8. That's 12 years we take back control of our country. And as you know, the Donald will open his mouth again and insert his, and he's got a big foot. He'll keep inserting it. But that's why people love him. Do you know what I mean? They love him and hate for it.
That's the thing. Sometimes you need a bit of that, you know, and he makes waves in the media, and sometimes that can be a good thing. So it's going to be interesting to watch. That's for sure. Robert, I was wondering if you've seen that some of the people in crypto are calling this like Operation Choke Point. It seems like the America and the Fed and the SEC is really trying to crack down on crypto. They seem to be doing it in Europe, and then they're talking about this CBDC coming out as a form of Fed Now in July. Robert, you were one of the first guys 2 years ago to warn me that, you called it at the time, Fed coin was coming. What are your thoughts on that, and why do we need to be concerned about that? And do you think that's what's happening? They're pushing the crypto down to bring the Fed coin in.
Well, as we started our conversation, it's centralized banking.
Right.
It's centralized money. It's money controlled by the government. Not that it's not already controlled by them, but from what I'm not really good, I'm not very tech savvy, but it's surveillance. They can control what you spend on, who you spend it with, what you're doing with it. So, you know, for years, and I can say Brian's been on my side for a long time, I've been saying buy silver. I was on Neil Cavuto for years now on Fox. I keep saying buy silver. And the reason for that, this is real money, and this is gold, which is real money. And so it's my self-defense against the Fed coin or crypto or the Chinese yuan, is that I can go anywhere in the world with this little silver dollar here, and I can spend it without being traced. Is that illegal? Well, they may make it illegal, but for right now, I can fly to London, I can fly to Romania, I can fly to China, and they'll accept this, and they'll definitely accept this here. So I'm doing everything possible to say, not do anything illegal. Please don't do that, because I don't want to go to jail and, dance to hula for some guy. But I want to get off of any kind of centralized government, centralized banking, and centralized money. That's my objective at this stage of my life.
Yeah, and you're right. This Fed coin or the Fed now or the CBDC, it's a way of them having much more control over your money and potentially censorship over your money.
Yes.
And if you think, what they can do to someone in OnlyFans by shutting them down because they don't like what they're doing, if you think that's bad, imagine via the blockchain them tracking every single one of your expenditures, locations, amounts, et cetera. And if you think it's bad to have your browsing history monitored, if somebody knows your spending history, I would argue they know you even better than that.
Correct.
And that's dangerous. It's funny enough, something that they're doing in China right now with the digital yuan. They've rolled it, I think, to about 100 million people. And from what I hear, it's very scary and very dark.
Well, I posted 2 emergency podcasts with a man named Andy Schechtman. And Andy is really tuned in. I mean, he'd be a good person for you to interview. But he talks about what I call the Biden crime family. They're ESG, environmentally, social, and governance and all this stuff. We're going communist, and they do it via our money. And so Andy talks, we were talking about just recently, Janet Yellen, she was a Fed chairman, and now she's Secretary of Treasury. Isn't that conflict of interest? That's fascism. If you understand, fascism is when a public institution is run by the government. And when you think of all these things they don't teach you in school, I'm going, holy mackerel. But what Janet Yellen just said is from now on, she will decide. The Fed and the FDIC and her will decide which banks live and die. She will decide. If that isn't 100% Marxism, and she's a college professor too. And you look at the guys fighting back, Brian, like Jordan Peterson, he's a college professor, but he's fighting back against Marxism. But unfortunately, as you know, somebody once said, nobody ever went broke, underestimating the taste of the American public. Nobody ever got stupid trying to elevate human Americans. We aren't the brightest guys on earth. We make a lot of money because we're the reserve currency of the world. But those days are coming to an end. The Chinese yuan and the BRICS nation, Russia, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now Saudi Arabia, and then Mexico is going to join the BRICS, and Japan's going to join the BRICS. We're toast. We're toast. The American dollar is gone. America crashes. We become a third world puppet state.
And what happens for the rest of the year when it comes to inflation in the U.S.? Is the Fed going to hike rates again? Again, a lot of people were saying you cannot raise rates again. One of the reasons Silicon Valley Bank collapsed was because of this massive rate hike. We've never seen anything like this in history, I think, of such a quick rate hike. Obviously, they got imbalanced assets on their balance sheet, couldn't, make their capital calls. And then the Fed went and increased another quarter. They could do that going forward. I think you've said this on the show, and I've had other guests that say, like Jim Rickards, have said the Fed funds rate has nothing to do with inflation. That's a supply chain issue. That's other issues. So they're turning this knob over here to say that we're changing this over here, and there's no correlation. It's like the button's not even connected. So how does this play out, do you think? Are they going to keep raising rates and keep sending everything down the drain?
Well, again, it's history. History is his story. And I was a history nut. But you go back upon what was Biden's first move? His very first move as president. He cut off the Keystone XL pipeline that ran oil from Canada to America. I'm into oil. I don't buy stocks, bonds, or mutual. I touch nothing paper. That's just my MO, my shtick. So I was selling oil when Trump was president. I was selling oil at $30 a barrel, and my oil came from North Dakota, Louisiana, and Texas. So I'm selling oil at $30 a barrel. I'm happy. I'm making a decent profit. I get tax breaks for selling oil. And the moment Biden, that was his first act, oil went from $30 a barrel to $130 a barrel. Biden, the people's president, is the biggest criminal I've ever seen. So I immediately, when he did that, because I'm an oil guy, I used to work for Standard Oil of California. I drove oil tankers up and down the West Coast. The moment he did that, I said, they're going to crush the middle class. So Biden's first act was to crush the middle class, because I could see some soccer mom standing there next to her Lincoln SUV pumping gasoline. I don't know how much it is a gallon, because it doesn't make any difference to me because I'm getting richer. I almost voted for Biden after that. I mean, when my oil went from $30 to $130 a barrel, I said, oh, wow, I'll vote for you. But I know he's crushing the middle class, and that's what leads to communism. So he's crushing the middle class, and then they say, well, it's Russia that's screwing up the oil. No, you did it, you idiot. Then he opens up the southern border, and fentanyl pours across, and that causes homelessness. As if we haven't got enough, because they can't function on drugs. Then he took us out of the, Afghan war, and Saudi Arabia said, screw you to America, and said, we're joining the BRICS. So this whole thing right now is being coalesced around a thing called the gold-backed Chinese yuan and the BRICS nation. And the BRICS nation is going to be about 70% of the world's population will now be using the gold-backed Chinese yuan, which means the U.S. dollar is toast. As you know, Brian, 1944 was when the U.S. dollar became the reserve currency of the world. And we violated that in 71 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. You look at this coin right here. This here is a John F. Kennedy 1964 silver coin. That was the last year America's coins were silver. So in 64, Johnson, president, took the silver out of this coin and it became a base currency, debased it. And after that, they could print as much money as they want. And our school system, we're a bunch of communists anyway. We keep saying, go to school, work hard, save money, pay your taxes, invest in a well-diversified portfolio, stock, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs. What happened in 74 was that was a year that the ERISA came out, Employee Retirement Income Security Act. Today is called the 401k or IRA. And that's why I wrote this book here, Who Stole My Pension? You look at the rioting going on in France today, it's pensions, isn't it, Brian?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all correlated. It's all correlated.
It is all correlated. It's interesting because I was talking in one of my classes and I was like, okay, so we talk about a lot of the themes that you talk about, right? How they don't teach money in school and how a paycheck is worse than a drug habit and it makes you complacent and it makes you poor. And then in France, they raised the retirement age from 62 to 64 and everyone riots in the streets because they're so used to getting that fix, that drug, that protection from the government, that illusion of safety and this living life happily ever after, when in fact it's just a ridiculous concept. People are living into their 80s. So what is the government going to pay for everything after 64, 62? I mean, but the whole paradigm is whacked in France. So they get angry, they riot in the streets because they probably were never given a financial education, Robert. So
no,
yeah.
But that's why I wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah.
Why do they teach us about money at school? Nothing. Is that an accident? No. So the advantage you and I have is we have some semblance of a financial education, looking from behind the scenes of the wizard. The wizard's just this big fake machine. You call it the City of London, I call it Wall Street. And I call it the retirement system. And the rioting in France today is America in 2 years. When the baby boomers of my generation find out they can't afford to retire,
right,
they're going to be rioting. They'll be, that's why, Brian, I sit here. One thing I like about America, this is a Dirty Harry gun. It's the 44 Magnum, same model. As Dirty Harry said, feeling lucky. How many rounds did I shoot? The most powerful handgun on earth. It's coming. You can see it in France today.
Well,
oh no, that's because they're French. No, it's coming.
Right. Well, last few years, Robert, so many people have talked and even tried to be proponents of this concept of the universal basic income. And people are talking about how this is a great thing and we need it. And, you know, AI is coming in and people are saying, well, that's okay. AI is going to replace all these useless jobs and everyone can have a nice universal basic income. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. First of all, that's worse than a paycheck. You know, it's the government giving you this, which means, guess what? The government now controls you. It also doesn't teach you how to create wealth like your rich dad did. So, like you said, they're literally onboarding us into the socialist system that you're seeing in Paris.
And then what happened on February 8th of this year, like the reason I wrote a book called The Capitalist Manifesto. But February 8th of this year, I was at Arizona State University. I was teaching all these young, the gifted students at Arizona State, and 37 of the teachers came after me. And that's when I said, that's enough. So Brian, in 10 days, I wrote my next book. It's called Capitalism Teaches People How to Fish. Marxism teaches people how to steal fish from people who fish. And it comes out on April 6th this year. It's only 500 copies of it. But I crashed it because I've had enough. And like I said, I flew these in Vietnam, went down 3 times. I fight for our freedoms. I didn't fight for, I just fought for our freedom. And we're losing our freedom because our academics are communists. And guys like Gad Saad and Jordan Peterson are speaking out. And I encourage people to speak out. Why let these academic types steal our freedoms? It doesn't make sense to me. Who cares what gender you are? I mean, I don't. You know, I'm glad they're finally getting men out of women's sports. I mean, what the heck's wrong with this?
Yeah.
What difference does it make? I mean, if women let the women kick those guys out. You know what I mean? I just don't understand this stuff.
Robert, you mentioned the ESG earlier, and explain to people, because when they hear ESG, they're like, oh, this sounds like good causes, environmental, social, governments. Tell me what's happening there, and maybe even talk about some of the big moves of BlackRock, which I think has $1 trillion of assets that are maybe pushing some of this agenda. Explain to people why maybe it's not so nice and altruistic, this ESG.
No, you know, E stands for environment, S stands for social, and G stands for governance, or the rule of law. And the rule of law is that all people are created equal under the rule of law, but it's not. And BlackRock is shutting down a lot of my oil projects. So what's that going to do to inflation? It's going to make it higher. You know, without oil, we can't function. You know, I just flew in from Romania via London last night. What's that cost? What's that going to cost next? What are they going to do? Make that British Airways jet fly in electricity? It's not possible. You define the laws of logic and gravity. So we have to have energy. Civilization runs on energy. So that's why Biden's first move was to stop the Keystone XL pipeline. And I immediately knew he's going to crush the middle class. And the middle class leads to revolution when they can no longer feed their kids. And you think this war in the Ukraine, I mean, look at this guy Biden. His kid was taking money from the Ukraine, Russia, and China. Give me a break. You know, Donald Trump would slap his kids around for doing that. So we've gone so hardcore woke communism Marxist that if we don't speak up, who are we? You know, as Jordan Peterson says, when you have something to say, silence is a lie. When you have something to say, silence is a lie. So my new book comes out April 6th, only 500 copies. You know, all the A students are going, but you have some mistakes in it. I said, yeah, but I sell more copies than you do, idiot. You know, I mean, I hate these A students. Oh, you misspelled capital. Well, what kind of capital am I talking about? Money or state capitals? You know what I mean? They're so anal, they can't see the wood from the trees. We've got to speak out, Brian. We've got to speak out. Who the heck are we if we don't speak out?
Yeah, we must. I appreciate you doing that. Tell me about Ukraine and what Biden's would do. He showed up there the other day. Like, how does this play out? And what do you see when you see this war in Ukraine? And obviously, we're sending lots of support there. Putin's, of course, doubling down. People are worried about World War III. Our drones are being taken down in the Black Sea. Things are escalating and potentially getting dangerous. Our mutual friend, Jim Rickards, is saying, you really don't want to play around with things like this because, these are two nuclear-powered states, and it only takes one.
Well, again, it goes back to Jordan Peterson, college professor who spoke out.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website, londonreal.tv, or click the link in the description below.